Good morning. Please welcome to the stage the San Diego Children's Choir. Please rise for the singing of the national anthem.
Please be seated, everyone. Good morning. Welcome, bienvenidos, to the 2020 Nonprofit Governance Symposium. How about that children's choir? That's the San Diego Children's Choir. Each year, more than 1,000 children ages 4 to 18 come together from diverse communities across San Diego to share their love of music with folks like us. What's their role, you might ask? Well, they are certainly orchestrators of not just song, but of the future. So join me in thanking them and playing them off for their service today and for having them help us focus just a little bit on what's going to happen today, tomorrow, and in the future of nonprofit governance. So speaking of the future, we are excited to have you join us for our 16th Annual Nonprofit Governance Symposium at the University of San Diego. I was talking to some folks here who think they might have been here since the very beginning. How many think they've made like 10 or more of these over the years? We're in a special club. We are committed to governance, for sure. My name is Laura Dietrich. I'm the Associate Director of the Nonprofit Institute and the Director of our graduate programs in Nonprofit Leadership and Management here at USD, and I'm also a proud board member of the Barrio Logan College Institute. So I think we should all share our board affiliations while we're hanging out together this week. I know many of you, if you're following along in the program, expected Dr. Emily Young, who we all love dearly, but I'm sorry to say that Emily's been called away to be with her family in Wisconsin. So she won't be able to join us either today or tomorrow. You'll have to make do with the rest of her wonderful team. And although Emily can't be here, I think we will honor her with an amazing celebration of democracy and community leadership by putting our all into learning more about the power of good nonprofit governance. So let's commit to that. This event would not be possible without generous sponsorship. You are all nonprofit folks, so you understand the importance of what I'm about to do, and the importance of expressing thank you in so many ways to our sponsors that made this event possible: KidSpark Education, Union Bank, Bank of America, California Bank and Trust, the San Diego Union Tribune, Aldrich, Cal Nonprofits Insurance Services, Community Boost Consulting, For Purpose Law Group, Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Fund, Moss Adams, Qualcomm, San Diego Business Journal, San Diego Grantmakers, Sempra Energy, and all our other generous supporters and friends that you can see listed in our program. So please visit them at their kiosks and ask them why they like to invest in the promotion of good nonprofit governance. So for some quick housekeeping items, there's a map of the building It's a confusing building available at the back of your program, as well as an abbreviated agenda on the back cover, and a really cool high-tech conference app that will be explained to you in detail shortly. Water filling stations are near the restrooms on both floors, which are at the back of this building. And Wi-Fi directions and social media information is also available. So although we don't like our students to multitask, we would like you to please post, tweet, snap, TikTok, whatever, all about governance. Let's go viral. I'm told it's not pound nonprofit governance. I think it's hashtag nonprofit governance. So just somebody take care of that, please. I don't have to tell you that nonprofit governing boards are essential to the existence of any nonprofit, and we know good governance matters. This symposium is all about providing you with tools and insights for promoting strong and effective nonprofit governance. We hold this event every year as part of our mission to develop values-driven leaders and organizations, as well as action-oriented research to address our community's most pressing challenges. So a little pop quiz before we begin. Did you know that USD is regularly ranked among the top 10 most beautiful campuses in the country? I know this is really shocking. It's very hard work to come here every day. But what we really want you to think about in the next 2 days and focus on and come to experience is the internal beauty of what happens when people come here to congregate and learn in community with one another. And while we're gathered today for this event, it is important that we realize that we are but guests on this gorgeous property. I want to respectfully acknowledge that the space we occupy today, this campus, is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. So as we set forth on this day, let's quietly take this moment to recognize the elders, past, present, and future, which includes all of us too, who have and will steward this land for future generations. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Lyn Corbett to the stage. Lyn is the Director of Nonprofit Governance and Community Programs at the Nonprofit Institute, and he is the director of this year's symposium. So with that, Lyn, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to see you all, and Laura mentioned about the people who have been here for a number of years, but how many of you are first-time attendees? Very nice, very nice. Well, welcome. For those of you who have been here before, it's very nice to see you again. For first-time attendees, we have some great things in store for you, and we look forward for you being one of our ongoing attendees. So, as Laura mentioned, my name is Lyn Corbett, and my responsibility is to be the director of this governance symposium, but also governance in the community that we do from an outreach perspective, but also all things in consideration of community programs. So that's everything that we do at outreach to the community through the Nonprofit Institute falls underneath my responsibility. One of the first things that we're going to take on today is to give our Kaleidoscope Award out. Each year, we look at organizations across the region who submit to be Kaleidoscope Award winners. Now, we know that many people are intimidated by even applying for an award like this, but we also know that you, as nonprofit community members and board members, we all go through a number of different things each year, and we get through it, right? We're resilient, right? And we keep fighting. So to start talking about this, I'd like to start talking about what are our modes of governance so that you have an idea of not only what good governance is, but also what are our modes? How do we judge people on this, but how do we know, what do we teach, what do we ascribe to as a group? So the first thing is there's 3 modes of governance. One, it's based on this Governance as Leadership book that we written by Chait, Ryan, and Taylor. There's 3 modes that we follow: fiduciary, strategic, and generative. From a fiduciary standpoint, that talks about the stewardship of tangible assets through the oversight of operations, legal compliance. The question here is, where do we need to focus our attention? What are we doing right? The next mode of government is the strategic mode, something that we do very well, and we have fun doing it. Right? This question answers this question answers where are we going and what is the plan? All right, dancing God. So the next one is the generative mode. And this is the one we don't do as well, but this is how do we make sure we're asking ourselves the hard questions? How do we make sure we're putting the right stuff on the table so we can have these deeper dive discussions? So the questions here, what are the new possibilities? What's coming up next? But also, what questions are we not answering? What questions are we not asking ourselves? So these are the three modes of governance that we all that we go by, and we want to make sure that we are able to recognize nonprofits who've submitted their applications to be considered. So we had a number of different people that submitted their applications, and we realized that no organization is perfect, but we all have changes that we have done where we partnered with our nonprofit communities, partnered with our staff, our executive directors, and fellow board members to really increase our impact. We also know that not all organizations are alike. So this year, we actually confer two different awards. The first one is going to be for the smaller organizations. Think about volunteer-led, smaller staff, grassroots, and budgets under $500,000. And then we also have one for larger organizations. Think about a larger paid staff, budgets over $500,000. All right, we are so excited to have these people here. Again, we judge them on these three, the fiduciary, the strategic, and generative, what we call the governance triangle. So what I'll do is I'll walk over here, and what we'll do is I'll make sure that it's going to be, let me grab this mic. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, hold on one second. We're going to make sure that we're going to invite the Kaleidoscope Award winners up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have them take a quick picture. We modeled this right after the Academy Awards, right? So we're going to have them take a quick picture, and then we're going to have them say a few words. Now, if they talk a little bit too long, we'll just, right? So, that means wrap it up, right? Okay, so the award, Kaleidoscope Award for Good Governance. So, we're gonna, let's start there. So, Cynthia. Okay, so this year's Smaller Organization Awardee is the San Diego chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, led by Brian Zumbano, President and Executive Committee, and Laura Rice, President-elect of the Executive Committee. We would like to invite the Association for Fundraising Professionals to come up and accept their award, and their board members can join.
Thank you. You know, when you receive an award for being a good governance on a board, it's not what we do today, it's what's been done over the years and the decades from past board members, past presidents. So happy to have Andrea, Lisa, and other past board presidents up on stage with us. So thank you on their behalf and on the behalf of all of our members and people who participate in our programs. Thank you. Quick show of hands. How many people are either members or have benefited from or attended one of our events? Oh, that's great. Thank you. Because you know, we're all volunteers, as Lyn mentioned, and we're volunteers for you. We want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to participate in AFP and become better at what we do. And one of the reasons we do it is, you know, there's 240 different chapters plus in America for AFP, and we're one of only a third that has received the Friends of Diversity Award. We're very focused on making sure we're as inclusive as possible. We recently launched a new Vice President for Inclusion, a new Diversity Inclusion Chair, and at National Philanthropy Day in November, or info to come, we'll be launching our first award for diversity and inclusion. So we want to make sure everyone can be involved And for those of you who didn't raise your hand, please get involved. Whether you're an experienced professional who wants to give back, a young professional who wants to learn, there's a place for you at AFP. We're here for your benefit. And lastly, I just want to thank USD again, not just for the award, but for everything you do. You push out data, you bring us together, you make us better as a nonprofit organization. So just want to say thanks again, and while there may have been some more deserving Kaleidoscope winners in the past, I can tell you there's never been one more appreciative. So thank you very much.
Let's give him one more round of applause. And spoken like a true nonprofit is the humility, right? That's there. It's just like, oh, do we really deserve it? And the question is that technically you're right. Many of us deserve it. Many of us deserve to be recognized because of the hard work that we do. So this year's larger organization awardee is the San Diego Workforce Partnership, led by Sam Tata and board chair Peter Kallstrom. Please welcome them to the stage as well.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Sam Toda. I'm currently the board chair of the San Diego Workforce Partnership, and it's humbling actually to be recognized with the Kaleidoscope Award, and so many of those boards that have received it before us. So on behalf of our board, just a sincere thank you. Just to introduce a few people that are here representing our very large board: Peter Kallstrom, our Chief Executive Officer and member of our executive board. Ed Hidalgo from the Cajon Valley School District and past board chair, and Jacob Richards, who represents our policy board and is representing the United Way. So, the work we do is really about getting jobs and addressing some of the issues, social determinants that are in our community. And I think that I know that our board are all very passionate around that and trying to advance San Diego. So on behalf of the board, thank you very much.
Please know that we open up the Kaleidoscope Award almost immediately following this reception. As long as you come to us now, your name is on our email address, so we send out it and we tell people to apply. And again, do not fear to be applied. Just to be recognized is important. We go to organizations, we talk to them, we talk to their boards, and again, we look at them in a number of different ways. And then we choose two, which makes it very, very hard because we're all doing incredible things. So the next section of our program is I want to just share a couple of thoughts about the Governance Symposium to you, and I want to start off with this video.
This is my time. This is my time to use what I've learned to save this man's life.
Well, a life or death moment outside a Chick-fil-A. An employee running to a man unconscious in the parking lot.
He spoke with 10 News reporter Anthony Purra about how he knew what to do to help.
That employee says at first he thought someone was just having car problems out here at the Chick-fil-A parking lot, but after a closer look, he realized it was something much more serious. The Chick-fil-A along Chula Vista's Olympic Parkway gets busy, but no customer demand is too much for Talia Nayuke.
And would you like any dipping sauce to go with it?
The 22-year-old has a reputation for going above and beyond at his job.
And I am a manager here, so I'm usually inside helping with guests.
But on Wednesday night, he was outside when someone needed help in a big way. A man went into cardiac arrest.
It looked like were just getting back from eating. They were just going to go home.
A camera outside the restaurant shows Talia running across the parking lot over to the man unconscious by a car. His friends trying to help him.
He wasn't breathing or anything, His eyes were rolled back into his head.
You can see him doing CPR on the man until paramedics arrived. He later found out what he did saved his life.
That was the place where God placed me to be at that moment.
Because as much as Tauya loves helping customers, he really just wants to help people. He wants to go to nursing school, and the pre-nursing classes he's taken came in handy during the emergency.
And that was truly a real big eye-opener to my calling to be in healthcare, because at the moment, it was like instinct took over.
Incredible young man. So what I'd like to say here is a couple of things. First of all, you have a young man who was doing his regular job. In the course of his regular work, he was prepared because he was in School of Nursing, so he knew what to do, very much like you all who are here today and also are prepared to know what to do. But what happens was when it came, he sprung into action, right? Challenges that we face usually is where we can demonstrate true leadership, right? No one starts out their leadership story saying, I was sitting at home on my couch and I was called to lead, right? No, it's usually you're facing a challenge and then you're called to respond, right? So he heard something and he could have said, like sometimes we say, somebody else will take care of it. Often at times, no one else will take care of it. You can't see on the video there, but there were already people standing around. So he ran over there, pushed the people out the way, and immediately started doing the work and told somebody to call 911. He was prepared, he took action, and then also your help comes from unlikely sources, right? When I go look for board members or I go look for somebody passionate, I don't go to look at Chick-fil-A and say, hey, am I gonna look for a board member? But when BoardSource surveyed 500 executive directors, 500 board chairs separately, the number one thing that they look for in a board member is somebody who could be passionate about the organization. Down at the bottom, number 8, 9, 10, or somebody who can raise money. Right? So the first thing we think about, hey, we need board members. Who has money? Right? But this young man took action and was prepared. So what I say that is because, first of all of you being here today is a part of being prepared, right? The question is that from last decade to the upcoming decade, next month, next 5 months, like what are we gonna do to take action? What are we gonna do to look for resources in the most unlikeliest of places? I believe that the next few years are gonna be a critical time for the nonprofit sector. And we have been doing things incredibly well, outperforming people who sometimes just say, oh, we're the third sector. When people say that we're the third sector, I say, you can't count. Right? Right? We perform incredibly well. But also they say, you know you're old when your dreams become regrets. Right? You know you're old when your dreams become regrets. That's those individuals who say, they say, hey, I want to, and then it turns around and says, I wish I could, right? But by attending events like this, by attending a lot of the USD events, you know, next year, January, I'm gonna be 50 years old, and if you come back, you can celebrate my birthday with me, right? But as I do that, I'm also finishing my PhD next year. Continuing to learn, continuing to that, so I continue to dream. So the point here is that as we prepare for it, we don't know what's coming around the corner. But there are thousands of people in our region who depend on us to know what's coming around the corner. So how prepared are we gonna be? I'll end with this statement. It's from on the week of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. One of our great liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. Every society has its protectors of status quo and its fraternities of the indifferent, who are notorious for sleeping through revolutions. Today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. Adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. Incredible, but also not easy, right? Many of us are volunteers, and it requires us really to go outside of our comfort zone. Our speakers for the plenary today, they're going to talk about what it really means to step outside what we know to be true, what we think to be true, step outside our comfort zone to really take action. And they have been very action-oriented in their own right. So with that being said, let me introduce our first speaker. And while I do that, why don't you guys give yourselves a round of applause for being here and also for just sitting through that process with us. I appreciate it. I will also say this, all of our speakers, including myself, we have sessions today. So after our speakers, we're gonna have a question and answer session, but then even after that, we all have our own presentations. So if you wanna spend some time getting to know us a little bit more or asking further questions, please feel free to do so. So our first speaker is Bina Patel. Bina was raised as a helper. She has served as a helper in the nonprofit sector, in philanthropy, and in government. For the past 8 years, she has led Safety Impact, a strategy, facilitation, and coaching firm focused on building authentic leadership and progress for the collective good. Her racial equity and inclusion work expands across the US and Canada, and we are glad to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming Bina Patel.
Thank you. Good morning. How y'all doing? Excellent. I am really glad to be here, and this is the biggest podium I've ever had a keynote at. So I'm going to use all of it sometimes. Yeah, so it's all mine right now. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you today to talk about some of the trends in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector. As you heard, my work is around diversity, equity, inclusion, and moving racial equity into the operations of organizations. So before I dive in, let me see some hands. How many of you have been to a DEI or racial equity training? Oh, yes. And how many of your organizations are in some way entertaining the idea or actively working on embedding DEI practices? Excellent. Cool. So some of this may resonate with you. Some of it may not. That's okay. And I really hope that this turns into a conversation during the Q&A, and I have a session right after this. So I'm really excited to stand here on the ancestral lands and try to speak some truth and justice into our space. Since we stand here on the ancestral lands, it's our opportunity and our responsibility to speak with love, generosity, and kindness. So I come here today with that commitment. So there's a lot to be said around nonprofit governance, diversity, and inclusion. And you saw in the tagline, this is about infinity and beyond, right? I'm not sure what to say about the infinity part, but I have a lot to say on the other parts. So like you heard, my day-to-day work is as a consultant, but what I really do is facilitate spaces, and I coach leaders just like you on figuring out how to handle the toughest questions around strategy and leadership practices that are embedded in DEI. How do we be the work of inclusive leaders? How do we honestly and authentically create space that's welcoming for those that might not look like us? That's my day-to-day work. So I think about this all the time. I love this work, and I do think you can have fun doing this work. We can talk more about that later. So, as I've worked in this field for over 20 years around the globe, in some really tough spaces, but also beautiful spaces where folks just like you really want to embed a new way of looking at the world, where they're making commitments to see a different kind of future. So as I come to you today, what I want to talk about is a bit about the trends in the field, but mostly the hidden trends in the field of DEI work. So the good news is that, as you raised hands, increasingly this is becoming a conversation at least. We see more and more opportunities at conferences, at workshops, at trainings, book clubs, all kinds of ways that this conversation is presenced for us, which is important. We're also seeing lots of organizations embed DEI practices. Funders are starting to ask grantees increasingly about their diversity and representation data. Some are increasing their grant making to communities of many beautiful colors. And some foundations have changed their investment strategies to be more aligned with the principles of justice and equity. They're disinvesting from funds, they're moving where they're holding their money. Nonprofits are increasingly co-designing and collaborating with community members. They're deepening their community engagement efforts. One foundation I worked with a couple of years ago is now designing a reparations affinity fund, which is wild and dope and awesome. I can't wait to see how it unfolds. We also know this is not new work, and so we need to honor that this work comes from civil rights leaders, from people who led the labor movement, gender equity movements, from the abolitionists and freedom fighters who came before us. We are centered in the arc of history, doing the moral work that many have already said no to. You feel me? We have a lot of people in these sectors who say, that's not my work. I do business work. We're here to do the collective work. And so I want you to honor that you stand in the legacy and in the shadows of those that came before us. So all too often as we look at these trends, we know that a lot of things remain unsaid. So I'm here to do the good work to say them. Ta-da! So here are some of my observations that come from working directly with staff, executive leaders, donors, board members, trustees, what they tell me in coaching sessions, what I see when I'm in the room with them that never makes it onto paper, that never makes it into the board briefing. You're getting some insider consultant secrets right now. So here's the first trend I see that's hidden. The first one is the over-intellectualizing of DEI work. So what do I mean by this? I mean that this first trend is I see over and over that people are getting caught up in the mechanics of this work, in the writing of the plan, the wordsmithing of the racial equity definition, the linear work plan of this process. We are hyper-focused on the operationalizing and tools. So I'll give you some examples, direct quotes from folks, none in this room, so go easy on yourselves. So here we go. We just want the tools, Bina. Can we skip this exploring and reflecting part of the agenda and just do the afternoon piece? We want our DEI work to focus on our external work, not our internal work. We don't want to waste time in our staff retreat on personal reflection or exploring individual staff viewpoints. You know, our trustees feel like they just don't have the time for this conversation. They really just want the staff to do it, but they don't like when some of that language comes up around, you know, race. I think we should focus on operationalizing, not so much where people are in this journey. So you're picking up the themes, right? This focus on everything outside, on tools and mechanics. So I need to say yes and also. This work is essential around embedding in strategies, programs, and operations. We actively need to be restructuring our institutions. So yes, that's the point, to shift our organizational might to actually do the work, to diversify and be more inclusive. But the trend of intellectualizing focuses on mechanics and misses one important point. The precondition to the success of your DEI work rests on the individual. It rests on the individual's ability to undo their own old patterns of behaviors, of the way the status quo behaves and how we all complicitly, sometimes knowingly and sometimes not, perpetuate it. The precondition is that the individual shows up to actually make the tools mean something. So when I've gotten those requests, I'll show people the tools of racial equity, and they're like, what? I can't do this. Right. Because you haven't gone inside yet. You haven't figured out what you believe about this work, how you want to show up for it, and what kinds of courage and purpose you're going to tap into. We have to investigate where our worldview comes from, why we think about power, authority, decisions, race, structure, why we think about the world and our work the way we do. Where does that come from? Who taught us this work? That's what we have to investigate before these tools and strategies mean everything. We have to be those leaders who can tap into the new ideas and cut the leash on this antiquated idea of because we've always done it that way. We have to get out of our own heads a bit and find out where we come from. And one more reason, which I think is not hidden, people have feelings about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then when you say racial equity, lots of feelings. So many feelings will come out. And in surprising and random ways, people will let you know they have feelings about this work. Someday I will write a book about all of these feelings and stories that I have worked through. You may have feelings about this right now. And if you do, welcome to the DEI party. So in order to do this work sustainably and to do it authentically, we have to bridge the spaces where the intellectual knowledge can connect with the feeling, the personal mission of doing this work. Even when it gets challenging and complex, we have to be able to lean into that, not move further away. One of the trends I see often is boards saying, I often will get a phone call that says, you know, Bina, let's talk. And I'm like, oh, damn, right? So a situation is afoot around the DEI work, the racial equity work. People are having feelings about it. And this trend is often to shut down, to close the work down, to go into those small rooms where the board chair, the executive director, and me are sitting to figure out, what do we do now? Let's just slow down. Let's be quiet. Let's figure it all right. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. There is no right in this work. As a leader committed to the justice, to the mission of your organization, it is your job to lean into this hard space, to show people we can work through complex and challenging moments about race, diversity, who gets a say and who doesn't, and do it gracefully. So the next big trend I want to talk about is that this work requires big moves and big action. You know, DEI is a weighty piece of work, as many of you are probably experiencing, and we tend to assume it requires lots of money or big actions and headlines. But let's think about this, that it doesn't. Transformation and incremental are not the same units of measure. Consistent incremental action is what creates transformation. Transformation is that ripple effect, the sustained change in systems and in organizations that create social impact different than it did before. Transformation. What changes that is a new habit, is how you make decisions, that you do those new decisions and create those habits every single day. The work of DEI is a lot like brushing your teeth. Sometimes it's like flossing. You don't like it as much, but you got to do it, right? That's what this work is like. DEI is the practice of incremental, consistent actions to create big transformation over time. The reality is this work can be overwhelming, right? I watched Curious George this morning instead of the news for obvious reasons. The work is overwhelming. You're in a border town. You're in one of the most expensive parts of the country. I mean, the work is endless for us. When we're feeling like, I just can't today, I don't know how to do this big work. We don't have the money, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources. Consistent, incremental action. What is the one next immediate step you can take to do the work of inclusion? So related to this is this hidden trend of the idea that there is a neutral space in this work. The folks I work with will often ask questions like, well, I don't know if we should take on DEI work. If you think back to your journeys earlier, maybe a few years ago, maybe even a few months ago, before this became a thing for you, you were asking questions like, I don't know, should we be doing DEI work? Are we the right organization? Is it mission creep? I don't know. Who should be doing this? So that's a different question than can we do it, which is about capacity, and I feel you on that one, and I'm with you. But this question about should we do DEI work assumes that we can wait to make a decision and that the system is neutral. And that while we figure out if we should show up, that everything's okay. But here's the thing, systems and the organizations in which you work are not neutral. Systems are dynamic and they're generative creatures. Right now, injustice and exclusion is happening, right? Like, this is not news, right? I hate to say it, right? But we know this. The systems are proactive in leaning into what they're primed for, the status quo, which is exclusion and injustice, protecting power and perpetuating unfairness. So the question is, can we bend it another way? Are you willing to engage in a system? So the question, the hidden trend about should we, when is the right time, maybe we should do it later, let's do it after strategic planning, not before, I don't know, all these things. The real question you should be asking yourselves, are you willing to be complicit in this work, or are you willing to figure out how to be proactive? There is no neutral in the work of the nonprofit sector that has committed to making tomorrow better than today. We are all here because the systems in which we work require us to do this work. It didn't come because people thought, oh, we need a job that they're underpaid and overworked. That is not why we are here. We are here because of a legacy of perpetrating injustice. Grant-making, voting rights, homelessness, community development, affordable housing, LGBTQ rights, climate, environment, every single one of these systems is primed to right now perpetuate injustice. The question is, will you get into that? Because we have to be willing and intentional about moving towards justice. So remember, there is no neutral. And waiting is a signal of privilege, not of action. So the last thing I want to mention is just whose work is this? So I often see folks when I'm doing coaching work, and especially lovely white identified folks, saying, I don't know if this is my work. I don't know if I should be the one leading this. And you probably shouldn't be the one leading it, but it is your work. So I want you to think about, for 1 second, when you picture who should do DEI work, who comes to mind? Who's the face? Who are the people that come to mind when I say, let's go do some DEI work? Is it you? It has to be you. We've inherited this stale narrative from somewhere that DEI work is the work for people of many beautiful colors, that it's for a DEI committee, that it's for some other generation, that it's for activists, that it's for radicals. I need you to get in that space. We need activists. We need radical people who are willing to tell the truth about the work we do and why we do it. DEI work is, in fact, the most inclusive and innovative work we can do. It is your work to do. So whether you have a DEI committee, you have a chief diversity officer, it's your time to do this work. We need people in positions of power who will show up for this. Because what I see is that when organizations have leadership that is silent on DEI, the consequences are dire. Staff leave. You don't retain good staff. You are not diverse and you lose funding because people are asking about that. You miss out on programmatic opportunities that could really embed social change at a community level because you have a relationship with them, because you let community have some of your power. The consequences when leadership is silent and inactive on this work, when they're passive, is dire. Your leadership matters. So in closing, I want you to think about infinity, the other part of this. Neil deGrasse Tyson had nothing to say on this question of nonprofit governance and infinity, so I came up with it myself. We're looking at 2030, because that's what I can do. I can't do infinity with you on this one, because that's too long to wait. So in 10 years, I want you to think about, what will you be saying on this stage? What are the trends you want to look back on? Will we be looking at a new way of understanding how organizations actually invest in communities, and that communities of many beautiful colors actually have the wealth in their own communities and are not being stripped of it? That foundations have understood that the spending plan is a way to maintain power, and instead you can invest commensurate with the outcomes you want? Will we see courageous and bold leadership as the norm instead of as radical? I want you to think about, as we're leaving, what kind of leadership do you want to deploy in the coming years for the trend you want to see? How will you contribute to this future vision where we all belong, where DEI is not a thing anymore, it's just how we do our work? Thank you.
Thank you, Bina. As we consider the future of equity in the nonprofit sector, I am pleased to introduce our next presenter, Rusty Stahl. He joins us from New York State and brings more than 20 years' experience working in leadership development in the philanthropic and nonprofit community. From 2002 to 2012, he led Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, an association of young and new foundation professionals, which has a chapter here in San Diego. Today, Rusty is founder, president, and CEO of the Fund the People, a national initiative to increase philanthropic investment in the nonprofit workforce. Let's welcome him.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Let's have another hand for Bina. That was amazing. And let's get my slide up. Somebody. Oh, do I click? Maybe it's me. Oh, I'm somebody. Oh, let's see. One more? Okay, there we go. Look at that beautiful scene. Oh, now, how do I go back? Don't want to. This is the way you want to start a presentation, you know. There we go. Okay. Good morning. I'll start over. Oh, it's going to go on me. All right. How many of you were on a highway this morning with traffic? All right. Picture that. Right? This morning, I'm going to talk to you about governance and staff and investing in the staff. How many of you are on a board of an organization with no staff? And how many of you have like one staff person? Okay. And how many have 5 or so, roughly? And how many are bigger, like up 20 and above? Okay, cool. That's helpful. So I'm going to talk about the value of the nonprofit workforce, the challenges that the workforce is facing across the nation, and then a new way of thinking and doing for boards and for all of us involved in this sector. You may be familiar with some data from USD about the nonprofit workforce, and I don't want to preach to the choir here, but the workforce here in San Diego, 2,682 staffed nonprofits, 121,000 paid employees, and $7.3 billion in total wages. So this is a workforce that often doesn't get talked about as a workforce, as an economic driver, as a driver of well-being in our communities, but it clearly is just that. And it's a very powerful and important player in our society. I liked how you said that, Lyn, about it's not the third sector. It's really a part of our democratic system. And I think of the nonprofit workforce as the first responders of our democracy and the last bulwarks of our democracy. Yet, we face some real challenges in our workforce. So instead of a beautiful, clear highway, we are facing a bottleneck on the nonprofit leadership highway with inequitable access, advancement, and ascension. So at the front of that bottleneck are long-serving leaders, people who really have a legacy of building this sector and creating the important organizations and programs that we all are inheriting. But they're having a hard time getting off the road, right? They're at the front of a bottleneck, and it's really hard to get out to the exit lanes. Now, long-serving leaders, it's not that they're bad people or they want to hoard power, but it's hard to retire from the nonprofit sector. Research shows that people are concerned with leaving might destabilize their organizations because they hold relationships with so many of the funders. Research has found that folks are concerned about what they'll do next. What's the meaningful next step for their life, right? They want to continue to contribute to social change. And so what comes after that? And then, of course, there's the economics. Can people afford to retire? Have they saved for retirement? Have they worked with their board, right, to actually create a nest egg for themselves and their colleagues? So there's a complex and thorny set of issues there that very much relate to boards and these executive transitions. Many, many, many nonprofits are not prepared for executive transitions. We hide our heads in the sand, hoping that people will just stay in place. The reality is people want to keep moving on the roadway, right? Nobody is indispensable, and we all have to prepare for inevitable transitions, hopefully healthy transitions, and prepare to help steward in new people into those roles as well and set them up for success and not failure. So that's at the ascension, what I call the ascension point, ascending to positional leadership. Advancement, people are stuck in traffic, right, behind those at the top of the lane. Mid-career folks don't have places to go. So many of our organizations are very flat. And so people have to zig and zag between lanes to move forward, and that creates foment and instability in our organizations. And access, a lot of millennials and the people we don't even talk about, Gen Z or whatever we're going to end up calling them, who are behind. Millennials are now like having kids of their own and in their 30s and whatnot. So the people who are like my niece, in college now are not millennials. They're the next cohort. How do they access this work? What are the equitable on-ramps through which people can come on? Are unpaid internships the default entry point to our sector? And if so, that means only people who can afford to work unpaid can get the experience and the networks to get those jobs. And there's a group in DC, Pay Our Interns, which has just gotten Congress, the Senate and the House, to allocate millions of dollars so that every House member and senator is paying their interns on Capitol Hill, so that it's not just the elite who can get those internships, which are a direct feed into staff positions on the Capitol Hill. These are the people writing legislation for our representatives. We need to do the same thing. Now, we don't have a big budget to pull from to allocate across all our organizations, but we need to be thinking about that in our own budgets. So this is the problem as I present it to you, this bottleneck on the nonprofit leadership highway. The last point on this, it's not just the people. It's not that baby boomers are self-centered and millennials are just, want to be leaders now and don't want to pay their dues, all those things. It's also we stereotype each other. It's also the roadway itself, right? There's not good signage. There's too many potholes. There's not, there's no shoulder. People don't get the opportunity to get off the road when they need a break and take a sabbatical, those kinds of things. So the roadway itself is out of date and crumbling infrastructure, if you will. So that's how I see our field, unfortunately. Now, what's behind this? It's a deficit of investment in the nonprofit workforce. Our research with Foundation Center data shows that about 1% of foundation dollars in grants is going to staff investment in grantee organizations, about 1% over 20 years, consistently. And from what we've been able to cull in terms of data, the limited data that's out there, only about 0 to 1% of nonprofit budgets goes to investing in the staff, in staff development. So this is a long-term, chronic, systemic deficit of investment in staff. Undergirding this deficit is a vicious cycle in which funders don't offer to invest in staff. In fact, they send the opposite signal. Well, those investments are overhead. We want to minimize overhead. Now, there's some conversation now, I know, here in California about full costs. Things, some big foundations are talking about increasing their overhead rates, but we're still talking about overhead, which is not what we should be talking about. It's not even a real thing. It's completely manufactured, a made-up myth that has no grounding in reality. So funders don't offer. They send the opposite incentive. So there's a low supply. And nonprofits don't ask. Nonprofits boards and fundraisers and executives are no dummies, right? We see the signals. We get it. So we minimize our staff development needs. We don't want to expose the weak underbelly of burnout, of we're understaffed for what we want to do and what you want us to do. We don't have a way to get the skills we need, all of those things. So we see this as a weakness. So we don't ask, we hide it, and we lead with our strength on program. So that means there's an artificially low demand on the funders for investing in nonprofit staff, which means it remains a blind spot for the funding community. They never hear about this from grantees or prospective grantees, so they don't think it's a problem. And I've worked with a lot of funders who just don't get it. They don't feel the pain themselves, and they don't see the problem. So what is the role of you all? And I'm on a board too. I'm on the board of the Beacon Hebrew Alliance, which is my synagogue in my town, and I've been on 3 other boards over time. And so what is the role of nonprofit boards in ending this cycle? We all, as board members, sit at a critical juncture between the funders, the staff, and other stakeholders, and positions of power in terms of establishing the norms of our organizations. What I want to share with you briefly here, and then more in my session tomorrow, and there's one this afternoon for executive directors primarily, is this idea of talent investing as a new theory and practice for how we manage and raise money and give money in the sector. Talent investing, advancing effectiveness and equity by deploying money and other kinds of capital to support and develop nonprofit workers. And we have some guiding principles and tools up on our website that are free that sort of help flesh that out. What I want to do with my remaining time is give you 6 things that boards can do to advance talent investing in your organizations. Okay, so feel free to take out a pen and pencil or write on your iPhone or whatever you want to do. And I'm happy to share these slides later. This is, by the way, my first time talking about this with board members, and so I'm excited and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share this, and I really do look forward to feedback, constructive criticism, because I consider this a draft. So 6 things boards can do for talent investing in your org. 1, people strategy. How many of you have a strategic plan or are working on one in your organization? Great, that's a lot. How many of those strategic plans have one of their goals about staffing? Pretty good. All right. Well, every strategic plan should have one of its goals be about how do we get the staff we need to implement the other 3 goals in this organization? Right? There's a book by a Stanford Business School professor called The Human Equation, and in there he quotes an airline CEO who says, my strategic plan, without the employees I need, my strategic plan is good enough to just leave on the plane when I get off. It's worthless without the team that can implement the plan. So actually integrating a staffing plan, that might mean looking at the org chart. What new positions do we need in the next 3 to 5 years? It might mean how do we get the talent we need? How are we going to pay people to stay in place? How are we offering training and learning for staff aligned with the plan so that they're growing into the plan? 2, invest in your executive director. You're their manager. They don't have another manager. If you're not offering performance reviews, you're missing an opportunity for them to grow, get feedback, give you feedback. It's a shame, okay? And I know because the board I'm on doesn't give our chief executive performance reviews, and I'm working to change that. It's an opportunity for them to feel like the board believes in them and cares about them as a professional and a human being. And it can be little investments. In Michigan, there's a community foundation that's putting up $5,000 or $10,000 and challenging boards to add 5 or 10 to provide whatever training their ED wants or needs. And it's a signal from the community foundation and the board, we believe in you. You deserve a sabbatical, or a week at Harvard to learn, whatever. Here's some money, it's not much, but it's for you to figure out. That's a signal, it's real, it's meaningful, it's an investment. 3, offer your executive a mandate that the part of their job is investing in the rest of the staff. It's part of their job, and you're going to hold them accountable for it and support them in doing it. They need to be giving performance reviews to all their direct reports. And middle managers, they need to be making sure that those people are giving performance reviews. Offering professional development and stretch opportunities for all staff. Everybody, from the top to the bottom, deserves investment. Even the administrative folks deserve to feel dignity and respect in their work and like they have opportunities for growth. And it's really, the board can create that political will and political space for the executive to create that culture, a leader-full culture. 4, people policies. How many of your organizations don't offer health insurance coverage for employees? Synagogue I'm on does not offer health insurance coverage to any staff. It's a shame. I'm going to work to change that. It's ridiculous. Things like that, right? So some of those benefits and policies are expensive. Often nonprofits do pay for health insurance because they know they're paying such poor salaries. Professional development is the coin of the realm for nonprofit folks because they know they're not going to get rich working in the sector, but professional development is something they can get. So sabbatical policies, et cetera, right? Some of these things are expensive. Some, you're going to pay that money anyway, so give the person a sabbatical. It doesn't actually cost you any more money. Some things are free, flex hours, stretch assignments, work from home, right? Some things don't cost anything, but they take a policy imperative. 5, budget for your human capital. If you're going to pay a living wage or a reasonable wage, if you're going to offer these benefits, health insurance, that all needs to go into the budget, professional development. So if you can embed it in your budget, maybe not this year, but maybe 2 years out, right? Be planful about it. Then that sets you up for talent-focused fundraising, which is my 6th item. Right now, instead of going from a place of weakness, oh, we're exposing our underbelly, you can go from a place of strength. We care about our staff. This is how we do our work. It's in our strategic plan. It's in our culture. It's how we govern. It's in our budget. So, foundation friend, will you co-invest with us in our staff as we execute with excellence the programs that you and we want to see happen for the community? Talent-focused fundraising. End the deficit of investment in the nonprofit workforce. Drive equity and inclusion and effectiveness in your organization. Invest in talent in your organization. And I want you to say it with me. Fund the people. Fund the people. To infinity. And beyond. Thank you.
So we'll spend the next period of time just taking some questions and answers so that we all could please take a seat. And Bina, join us up here. And if you have any questions, there's 2 microphones in the audience, and it will allow us the opportunity to take any questions. Rusty, there's a microphone right there if you can grab it. So the people with the microphones, they'll come to you so everybody can hear. 1 microphone's over there. So I'll start off with the first question while the microphones make it to their people. The question is that it seemed like, although these are 2 different presentations, that there's a significant overlap. Can you care to share on how do you feel they connect and what might be the overlap?
Well, I had a heads up on what Bina's presentation was going to be about. So I tried to weave it together, hoping that at Fund the People, we recently did a research initiative called Talent Justice, where we tried to frame the issue of intersectional racial equity and talent investing and tried to bring them together. So it's been very much on my mind, how does investing in talent relate to equity and inclusion? And I've seen people of color set up for failure as incoming EDs, following long-serving white leaders and things like that in my own network of friends and colleagues. And so to me, those kinds of things are both tragic and avoidable potentially. And so I do see them as integral. I will say that I think your presentation pushed me because I've fallen into some of those same traps of like linear thinking or focusing externally, like on that research initiative, and feeling stuck in terms of my own and my organization's internal work. So it was helpful to be pushed by your presentation as well.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
So many things to add, but thank you for sharing the racial disparity in this work. And I appreciate it. I think the way they also dovetail is that this is a question about not only how much we care about this, we of course all care about our staff. We care about the well-being, issues of burnout and retention. But I think what you hear from both of us is the call to action of figuring out, so what? So when you care, what do you do? This question of how do you measurably shift the structures, the decisions, the budgets to do this work? That's the only way it happens, right? And I mean, it's an astounding thing that to make it a priority, you make it a priority, right? Like that's how this will happen. And so I appreciated the kind of rootedness of saying, you have to do this. It won't emerge on its own. The same way practices around DEI just don't fall on your head one fine day. Yes.
Thank you. So we had a couple of hands up, but I don't see the microphones to them. Taylor, why don't you start us off? You can just speak to it.
Hi. So my question is around, I work in learning and evaluation for MAC, and so a lot of my headspace is occupied by how do we measure the impact of this? How do we actually measure the impact of investing in our staff? How does it show up in the impact that our programs deliver? And so my curiosity is around, do you have examples or stories of organizations that have invested in their staff, and how have they been able to show that through measurement or through program evaluation so that they can go back to their board and say, hey, look, we've done this, we've invested, and here's how it's transforming not only our organization, but our community?
It's a very good question. And there's too little data out there. We've been trying to collect what we can find, and actually we'll be presenting at the Grantmakers for Effective Organizations conference this spring about just that. And we're engaging Kelly Hannum, who is a consultant, used to work with the Center for Creative Leadership, which I think is a partner at USD. And she's written or edited a couple books on evaluating leadership development in the nonprofit space. And so we're working with her. But we found 16 evaluations commissioned by foundations looking at initiatives where they've been funding some kind of grantee leadership or staff development. And there is data out there. There's lots of different qualitative and quantitative ways to do it. But one that I think is an excellent example is the Haas Jr. Fund in San Francisco. They fund nationally. They've had a initiative called the Flexible Leadership Awards, and I think it's gold standard for the field. They put up a firewall between the grant maker and the nonprofit. They provide a consultant to do the assessment of what is going on that's a problem, and then how do we want to create a plan for leadership development in our organization. Every plan aligns their mission goals. So like I was saying about a strategic plan, so they're driving their goals as an organization through staff and leadership development. And they've had incredible results. And it's a 5-year, it's on top of program funding, it's an award that the organization then uses to implement this plan that they create with the consultant. And I mean, I have a slide I can share with you separately, but the organizations have busted through their fundraising goals and their program goals. So it's really terrific. And their website, so it's haasjr.org, Haas Jr. They have up there like video, the evaluation report, but then videos with grantees and the staff, short videos, vignettes, and the evaluator talking about the evaluation and what they found. And so I'd refer you to that, but we're trying to find as much data as we can. One of the challenges with the deficit is funders don't care about this stuff. They don't see it as a problem. So they're not funding it, and they're certainly not evaluating it or talking about it publicly because they're not sure they can show this evidence, which fuels the lack of evidence and data out there in the field. So that's one of the things we want to change, is that folks need to be talking about it, not when they're ready, not when it's done and they can brag about it, but here's where we are, here's what we're learning.
I think there's another question back there.
Hi, I'm Ann McEnany from the International Community Foundation here in San Diego. And my question is a little long. You talked about retirement and succession planning and executive transitions. And what I've noticed from the private sector is that there's professional development off-ramps for executives into the nonprofit sector. And I'm wondering if there's any data collection around that, if anyone's tracking it, and if there are on-ramps in the other direction where nonprofit executives can actually on-ramp into the corporate sector and try to influence some of the bigger capital flows toward achieving our sustainable development goals.
If you want to answer the tangible part, but I have just one quick comment on that from the inclusion perspective and equity, and this thing of like what will be in 10 years. There is this cultural condition in the nonprofit sector that we've inherited around corporate structures work for us. Board of directors work for us. I mean, we're a sector that is phrased by our tax status, for crying out loud, right? I mean, let's change that first, right? But what I want to point to in that is this idea of like you can land and go do good in this sector is something the nonprofit sector has to own as a cultural precondition to changing the way we do work. And I think that comes with not only how staff and boards are organized, but the methods that we use to get to our outcomes. We're using so much corporate and business and private sector jargon, structures, processes, decision-making tools. Our boardrooms look like private sector boardrooms, as if community members shouldn't be in there, right? Foundations have some of the most beautiful offices I have ever been in, and it says community foundation. And I'm like, no one can walk in here. There's security. Those are these cultural norms that sit under the nonprofit sector that when you're thinking about redesigning need to be addressed. Because in order to say, I don't think we want this person in our hiring pool, if we're doing an executive search, let's actually not draw from the corporate sector, from retirees, et cetera. That's a decision that has to be made up front. And in order to do that decision, you need the norms and understanding of the organization to be able to draw the line there and say, this is not our talent pool. They are not who we need to serve this in this certain capacity. We have other spaces for them. So I think there's a rootedness in understanding how to transform where that problem is coming from that also needs to be tackled. Yeah, do you want to add?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think when Bridgespan put out their report on the nonprofit leadership deficit, which I think was the wrong framing, but it stuck, all of a sudden there were funders and nonprofits cropping up to say, let's go find MBA students to come in and fix our sector, and I think that's the wrong approach to, but no, I would say we don't have great off-ramps for folks from our sector, and that's one of the things I would love to see happen is kind of emeritus opportunities, fellowship kind of opportunities for retiring or outgoing executives because they have so much knowledge, relationship, experience to share. And I would love to see when nonprofit execs retire, and it doesn't have to be the executive director, it could be someone else, but that they have some pay waiting for them from their local funders to say, okay, now we'd love you to write and talk and mentor folks in the sector and go talk at USD about your 50 years of experience, go teach, not put them out to pasture, but utilize that talent. Because otherwise we lose it, we lose access to those folks. So I think it's a really, really great point. I don't know if it makes sense for them to go to corporations or business. I think it'd be great to sort of retain their knowledge and fueling our knowledge as a sector. So I will say what I talked about in retirement, there is a great little paper by Frances Kuhnreither and a few colleagues. She runs the Building Movement Project, buildingmovement.org, and she has this paper called The New Life Cycle of Work. The New Life Cycle of Work. And that was where I got those findings about how, in particular, they interviewed baby boomers about what they're thinking about their own retirement or departures and their anxieties, and that's where I got that from. It's a great paper.
And one other, you can make sure the microphones get to the people. One thing I'd like to add is that when the young man that I showed you on the video, when I talked to him, I went up to him and said, hey, I'm proud of you. And then I said, what'd you do after you saved that man's life? He says, oh, I went back to work. Right? And I think that there's this thing about intentionality. We are so busy that even though we mention it and we talk about it, we still don't do anything about it because we're so focused internally within our organization. I think there is a point here where saying that this level of investment has to start somewhere. It has to start now, and it has to grow. Very nice. Yes, sir.
We live in the United States of America. We celebrate the United States of America, and we flourish in the United States of America. Why are we not including unity in our discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is, for me, it is included in a deeper understanding of what inclusion means. And actually what we're talking about is a place of belonging. So it didn't come up in the keynote as much, but in the work I do, I don't look at just trying to say, oh, well, now we have, 5 more Black people and some indigenous, that's not what we're here to do. I think what we're here to do is exactly what you're saying, is that we have to find a way in which I can self-determine and you can self-determine how we coexist, the unification, instead of what is currently happening, and we sometimes call DEI and diversity work, which is, well, we'll hire you, person who's different than us, but you're gonna have to play by our rules. That is not a factor that creates belonging and unification. And you see that in lots of ways. I just read the most unfortunate article, and you've probably seen so many different examples of a young man who won't be allowed to graduate because of his dreadlocks. I mean, what is this? What is this thinking that you don't belong here because of that? That's just one small thing. But if we think about how individuals culturally, ethnically, racially, in their gender, in the choice of their gender identification, choose to self-determine, do we have the place to let them come to us and say, you're welcome on your terms? I don't need you to show up different. I don't need you to show up differently to be welcome here. And it's that welcoming ability that creates unity that is sustained, not the conformity, not the rules that say women learn to be like men to be in the boardroom. That is not what works. to tell youth, well, this is how adults like you to speak. This is how adults like to work. Those are not factors of unifying a community. And you see those in policies and decisions and the social norms of organizations and communities that we work in. They come out in big and small ways. And I think your question points to, can we do a deeper investigation of what we mean to let people belong? And that it's a two-way street. I'm going to do my work to let you come closer. And even when it's hard and I don't understand it, I'm going to lean into that space. Because it's not my right to determine who and how people show up in this community, in any community. So I think there's some notions around what inclusion means. Another trend in the field is that we are creating some superficial conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're not deep. This is that thing of over-intellectualizing it. We're not talking about these deeper factors of where white supremacy fits into not understanding how we can connect, about how gender norms play into this. Like, we're not having a deeper conversation about what it means to create a place of belonging and what our role in the nonprofit sector is in order to do that. That's not the conversation. And so I welcome all of you to say, like, how do we change the language and move from this superficial way of understanding DEI as a tagline to go to the deeper space of, like, what are we actually talking about? What are we struggling to find the right words for, and what is the essence of that? So thank you for the question and raising the phrase unity.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that too. And I feel like our country is on a journey towards, becoming more united, becoming more inclusive and open to all our people. I've been reading this biography of Frederick Douglass, and just seeing how this idea that Dr. King talked about living out the value, these stated values of our founders, and getting closer and closer to that, and how hard that is, and how hopefully we're on this journey toward that. And it is, I think, a constant evolution in terms of being a nation of immigrants, being a place that also, has slavery and pushing people off their land, rooted in our history. And we have to address those things in order to get to unity. So as a white guy, I think it's important for us to be acknowledging some of those things rather than sort of paving over them in order to be united.
Thank you. We'll take one more final question. Lisa? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Paul.
Me? Thank you very much. I'm Lisa Ritchie with Netzel Grigsby. Thank you both for your very thought-provoking presentations. So I had a question, Bina, when you mentioned that it might not be best for a white person to lead the DEI work. I just wondered what your thinking is behind that. I would think that we would want the most passionate and skilled person to lead it, and it comes from being a Holocaust survivor's daughter. So I'm just wondering about that.
Okay, great question. So what I want to provoke in that comment is a question more of allyship and co. So what I often see is a question that it's either or. Either I will be the one leading it at the front, regardless of my identity, because I know stuff and I'm passionate about it, or it's not my place at all. And I shouldn't do it and someone else should do it. Like, who am I to say that? The majority of clients I coach are actually white executives struggling with this question of what is my space? And so what I want to offer is that this is actually not a question of lead, the way we traditionally think of it. That's a very colonized mindset of what it looks like. And what I want you to think about is, how am I in a relationship to create a movement? And that some work, yes, is absolutely for white identifying individuals, for sure, to go back to spaces that look a lot like maybe some of your boards look like, where there's some trends around racial or gender norms there, right? And it is absolutely the work of white identifying individuals to go back to predominantly white spaces and do some work there. It's also the space, though, for white people to say, let me learn from someone else, and under the conditions by which would a black woman lead this? So it's about shifting power. That's actually what equity is about. That's what can create the unity in a community. The inclusion is not just about, well, we're all here. Oh, we're quite diverse up here, right? But thinking about who has power up here. How is that being defined? On what terms are we defining DEI work? So just one more thing to add to this. I often see that when white individuals step into this space, they are curating this work in very specific ways that continue to silence certain kinds of experiences for people of many beautiful colors. It's not malicious. It is just the life experience of it. So what I want you to think about is this is about both and. It's about a bigger space, not a smaller space. Leadership, we look at as a pyramid. I mean, think of your org chart. One's at the top. I mean, that's craziness in the world of inclusion and belonging. So the question is actually, how do you create a more expansive space for people to show up and do this work together and be mindful of where your space is? White allyship is not about walking with black and brown people all the time and saying, totally, I'm with you. Like, I got that part. Like, okay, cool. I need you to stand in front of me. I need you to go back to the places where I am not allowed and where I am immediately judged because of the color of my skin. I have had board members come up to me and say, well, Bina, of course you would do this work. I don't know what that means. But I also want to know, why aren't you doing this work? I had a board member say, you know, Bina, I really think you're preaching to the choir. And I was like, oh, you think so? Amazing. How do you know that? Which I did not ask him. But I said, you know, I'm curious to know what makes you think that you all know this already as a board of this community foundation. And he said, well, you know, we really care about the community, and I think you should be out there. And I was like, what do you mean out there? Mind you, I was in Colorado. And he was like, you know, there's people who are not the choir, who don't understand anything, who really don't want to talk about these things. You should go out there. And I was like, you have lost your mind. If you think I'm going to be the one to go stand in front of Farmer Dude in Colorado and do that, you should go out there. You know them. You look like that. He's not going to shoot you. He might shoot me. We are in Colorado. Like, trust, I know the game here. Like, this is not going to happen. I want to offer that for white identifying individuals, this is a complex space, and it's about more and togetherness, not a hierarchical space of one leader and it must be me.
And I, just to add on that, the final thought here is that when I joined my first board, it was in San Diego, and I came down here in San Diego, and I said, oh, I'd love to join your board. They said, we're going to tour you around. So I walk up, I said, hi, I'm here. She says, finally, we have some diversity on our board. And I was like, here we go. She says, none of us have little children anymore. So I had the issue, and I teach this work. So I was like, she's going to be talking about my color of my skin, and she was talking about that I had a little child, and that makes me diverse on the board. So I have to think about where are those spaces that I need to change as opposed to putting it in place in this on someone else. So we have some exciting things in store for you today. What I do is I have a couple of points before we go to our next session is about how are you going to make the best out of this conference. So the first one, the way to make the best out of this conference is use the app. We have a detailed app. If you can't figure out how to download it, it's called Socio at your app store. Outside, we have some people that are going to help you download it, and they'll be able to. You can friend request each other on this. So go ahead and make sure you friend request me. I have no friends. The next one is, know where you're going. I guarantee you, you will not be able to find the bathroom in this room, in this building. So make sure you know where you're going. There's an app on there also, and an agenda. Since we've been talking about DEI, governance essentials, and leadership, we have tracks, and those are noted at the top here by different colors. So you'll be able to see if you're interested in a specific work. All of our sessions are going to be incredible, but for those of you that are looking for these specific tracks, Please follow them. The last one, we have a networking opportunities this afternoon at 3:30. We're going to have a Kaleidoscope Award celebration where we welcome all the Kaleidoscope Award members. And tomorrow morning, also what we'll have is various networking opportunities. Tomorrow morning at 7:30 for you early risers right across the street, we're going to have 2 community conversations, one on leadership and one on DEI, where we'll have small groups talking about this stuff. So please take advantage of that. And then lastly, the learning does not stop here. You know, we do this work all year round. I don't want to see you only on January. I love January, but I'd like to see you more throughout the year. We have a lot of programs here. We have in our institute alone, but also at the university and in the community. So thank you all very much and enjoy your first session.